Alrighty. Hi, I'm Chiara, Insight Equine. So I'm a trainer, instructor, saddle fitter, and obviously here to talk to you today about saddle fits. So I'm going to be talking about saddle fit to horse, saddle fit to rider, and the saddle fit to both. You see I've got them all pretty mapped out for you here. So we'll talk a little bit about anatomy. Anybody here do 4-H or pony club? No? Okay, this might not be review then. So I'm just, we're not going to do the whole horse. I'm only going to do the parts that pertain to saddle fit, so kind of from here to here. So green, I'll go through the green lines first. Hines is probably going to cooperate. He's a pretty gentle guy. This first line right here, this is the widest point of his shoulder. So Carson, something you'll find interesting, I prefer Western saddle fit over English saddle fit. The reason being is that Western saddles are designed for working. They take their design from old military saddles, and they are actually intended to fit the horse for long periods of time. All Western saddles, the bar profile in the front, is fit to this angle. In the 1950s and 60s, when close contact riding became popular, they started fitting to this right here. This is the angle of the withers. Pretty big difference, right? In terms of width and angle. So we talk about width is this, angle is this. So very big difference here. A lot of these close contact English saddles fitting to this, we're running into some pretty big issues with front end lameness, and I'll kind of circle back to that in a minute. But just wanted to highlight kind of the difference right away between these 2 points. Here we have our saddle support area, so I call that the SSA. And this is sitting over the longissimus muscle, and that one we can remember because it is the longest muscle of the back. So here, weight bearing, and I'll have you guys come up in a sec so you can kind of check this out, but this is our weight bearing surface, thoracic vertebrae to 18. So you guys know a little bit about cervical, thoracic, lumbar, blah, blah, blah. So the thoracic vertebrae, all these vertebrae are connected down to the sternum, so they're strong, right? Everything behind this is not. So this is where we want the panels of the saddle sitting. Yeah, but you're a good boy. So this just marks the last rib. And then our kind of lumbar zone here. This is our latissimus dorsi, which I just enjoy saying. In trainer talk, we call this the top line muscle. Even though it is not technically the muscle at the top, just like with us, the lats are what engages the core and lifts the back. So really important here that this is not encumbered and has lots of freedom. Here's our balance alignment points and our pecs. Everybody got it? No, I'm like, remember, there's going to be a quiz. There's not. So now we've got our red marks. I've outlined the scapula here. And what I'd like you to see, if everybody can see this kind of from where I am. May I have this, please, my friend? Good boy. Thank you. I want you to see what happens when his leg extends forward. Everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Where did the scapula go?
Down and forward.
It kind of goes this way.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why the fit to the wither angle is not correct.
So I guess that would be up and back. I was like 100% wrong.
Well, but like not necessarily, because it sort of depends on where you were looking. Because this part would absolutely go forward. Right? But this part comes slightly back. So what we need is for the scapula to be able to move freely underneath the saddle tree and not be encumbered, because the scapula is cartilage and not bone. Does everybody know the difference there, or why that would be important? Yeah, cartilage isn't going to knit and fix itself. So once the cartilage is damaged, it's pretty much game over. Necropsies are showing a lot of English riding horses with seriously deteriorated scapulas. So that's just sort of something to consider. Not for you though, buddy. You have a very healthy shoulder. Yes, you do. So we want to make sure that it's almost like a sliding glass door, that scapula can just have total freedom of movement. Anybody here familiar with TCM? Traditional Chinese medicine, body meridians. Like Shandy, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've just never heard it called TCM.
Oh, yeah, traditional Chinese medicine. So we're talking about body meridians. There's the bladder meridian. Anybody familiar with that? Familiar with Masterson stuff? So bladder meridian is similar to the nuchal ligament. I'm going to run down through here, and there's a little spot right about here, bladder meridian lung point. So if we have pressure here, from an improperly fitted saddle. It can make it really hard for the horse to breathe properly. When you are working with a horse, when you first get on them, if they are mentally relaxed and physically comfortable, they'll give you that like big blowout, that, and they should do that within the first few minutes of you getting on. If they don't, that's a spot to check. Now, if they're mentally tight, they're not going to breathe properly no matter how well their saddle fits. But if this is a relaxed horse who's really chill and easy to get along with and generally easygoing, but they're having trouble catching breath, check there. So next we've got this big X right here. I don't know if y'all can see that clearly. Around the wither cup. Anybody here seen live cover breeding?
I tried broodmare first, so I saw that.
Did you?
Yeah.
Whoa! So in live cover breeding, sometimes it's just, ye old west and they chuck the stallion out in with the mares and see what happens. But a lot of the times, particularly jockey club has to be, if for a horse to be registered jockey club, they have to be bred live. So what they do is they hobble the mare so she can't run away. They put a bite collar on her. You can Google this and watch a YouTube video if you want. But they put a bite collar on. Stallion comes, mounts the mare, and he bites the bite collar. Well, if the bite collar's not there, the stallion bites right here. And what it does is causes the horse to drop their back, rotate their pelvis for easier breathing, and it freezes the nerves down the front legs. Super fun. I was watching, this was a year and a half ago or so, maybe 2 years ago, documentary on the Discovery Channel about predators and prey and what happens to the prey animals when they are eaten. So similarly in the wild, if poor Heinz here were to be attacked by a mountain lion, the mountain lion would grab him here, here, bite here, freeze the nerves down the forelegs, and then the horse actually leaves mentally, so that the animal leaves so that they don't know that they're being eaten, which is nice. Ugh. But all important things to think about, because how does that relate to saddle fit? That if we have a saddle that is putting pressure here and pinching here, what is our horse going to do?
Go down.
They're going to hollow their back, they're going to raise their head, they're going to have that anterior pelvic rotation this way. All the things we don't want. Because we think about a horse traveling in nature, this is their head and this is their tail, just totally natural horse, never been messed with. They tend to travel a little like this, right? They're a little downhill, makes sense. Most of the horse is in the front, so they're weighted like this. When we put rider weight on an uneducated horse, they do this. It doesn't really matter what saddle we're in, they're all going to kind of do this. And as riders, our job is to teach the horse to move this way, to lift their front, lift their shoulders, engage their hindquarters so that they travel more uphill, right? Everybody's kind of familiar with that. That's just kind of simple biomechanics. But what happens when we have pressure here and a couple other places we'll get to, they can't leave this. And we end up with a whole host of issues. Primarily the big one that everybody's heard of is kissing spines. Everybody's heard of kissing spines? Yep, that's a big saddle fit issue. So for a long time I thought it was just crummy riding that caused, so bad, that caused kissing spines, but it's not. You can be the best rider in the world, but if your saddle doesn't fit, there you have it. So then I've got these other little X's here, and I've made it a little lower than it actually would be because I wanted you all to be able to see. I'll move him again a little bit, see if that'll help. Over you go, bud. Good boy. One more. One more. There we go. You are very cooperative. Maybe you can see that a little bit better.
Yeah.
So these are our spinal processes. So vertebrae, tendons, nerves, ligaments, everything running through there. We don't want to have any pressure there. And this is a big thing about the Western saddles. I've never seen a Western saddle in my life that put any pressure on the spine. And when we get into looking at the saddles, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Super important, a lot of these English saddles that are popular today have very narrow gullet channels. Huge kissing spines issue to have pressure here. Also why we can't have treeless saddles, and unfortunately bareback. Now I get on my horse and I fart around bareback for funsies once in a while. We cool out, it's fine. But you shouldn't ride without a tree or without proper support for the horse. Is everybody sitting here right now? Take your hands like this. Sit on top of them, get them underneath your seat bones. And now bounce up and down. Yeah, that's why we can't ride in treeless saddles. The whole point of the tree is to distribute our weight evenly across the saddle support area. So That's why. I know, I'm like, sorry, I know everybody loves treeless saddles because they're so comfortable, but nope. No can do. Right, my buddy? Back here, I have this big X over the lumbar. So I was talking a minute ago about how important it is to have no weight of the saddle extend beyond the last rib. The reason being is that everything back here in our lumbar area, they're referred to as floating ribs. They kind of stick out like little bat wings. So they're not connected. There's no support for them. So if we have any weight sitting back here, we actually, sometimes saddle fitters, we refer to this as the bucking reflex. It's incredibly painful for the horse to have weight back where it's not supported. They will do anything they can to relieve that. Even if it means I've actually seen horses do this, where the saddle fits beautifully here, but it's too long. So the horse actually kind of bumps the saddle forward and runs it into its own shoulder to avoid having the weight back here. A lot of the times when we are looking at horses who have bucking issues, it's just a length of saddle issue. Fix that, the horse stops bucking. So people think it's magic, and I'm like, nope, science. But there you go. Then here we just have our pressure points on the lats and pecs. So that's for our girths and our cinches, that our buckles aren't sitting on these muscles. And that's just like a pressure point pinching thing. A lot of the time, I've fixed like poorly fitted saddles just by simply, well, you need a longer girth, or you need a shorter girth, or whatever. And it's like all of a sudden the horse is no longer touchy about being saddled because they're not getting pinched. All right, any questions so far? It was like, whoa. Oh yes, you're very good boy. So a few other things that we'll talk about while we have him here. He's actually, I had intended, and I apologize, I was gonna bring two horses today. One with a young horse with a super healthy, excellent back, and one an older horse in rehab with every freaking mess on it you could imagine. Our truck broke down, I have no trailer, I did not bring horses. But he doesn't give the best example of a horse who's been ridden with a poorly fitted saddle. He does have these scars here, which I don't know, I couldn't say, this is from his former life, whether or not these are saddle fit related. In a Western saddle, I would say unlikely, but possible if they weren't using a pad, which I have seen, and we'll talk about that later. So, you know, just something to note, but in his body, I was saying to Carson, there's only one little thing, and I'm gonna have you each kind of come up to check this out. He has this slight little dip right here. I don't know if you can kind of see that. You'll be able to see it when you come up, that his spine is straight, 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 even, dip, straight, even. And that little dip is just about having the saddle be too long for him. So what will happen, some of the things that we see when any of these areas are really compromised, like I said, we see the cartilage damage in the shoulder. We see kissing spines, hunter's bump. Does everybody know what a hunter's bump is? Start noticing, you start looking at horses' backs, just at any barn you're at, have a look. He does not have a hunter's bump, so I can't really show it. But there'll be like a bump like this. They're referred to as a hunter's bump or jumper's bump. Does anybody kind of think they know what I might be talking about? Where like the back is like flat, 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 and then right about here there's a little peak, and then it kind of goes back down. So that's usually a saddle fit issue. That can also happen from improper riding and correct biomechanics.
Why is that a saddle fit issue? Like what causes it?
Usually with that, it's pressure here. So pressure on the wither cup, and it's all about that kind of anterior pelvic rotation. What we want when the horse is being ridden is for his pelvis to rotate this way, right? So that they sit back on their hocks, they lift, that's just a postural thing. And he's clearly ridden very well because he looks great. But what happens when the spine, this area is compromised, the pelvis will tilt forward and the bones will actually run into themselves, which is how we get kissing spines and that hunter's bump. Right, buddy? That's gonna bring a horse with a big hunter's bump, but oh well. Okay. Well, that was pretty much
how old
it.
is he? Do you know?
How old is Heinz? 10?
We think he's about 10.
Roughly
We've
10?
heard a lot of different stories about him because he was, we got him from a lady who got him from the auction. And they think he was bucking horse at some point, so they're not too sure, but 10 is about what
That
he's-
might explain those marks on his back.
Yeah, well,
being
because
a
they
bucking
don't
horse.
had wrong saddles.
Chiara.
Yeah.
Oh,
Do you want a picture of JJ?
His isn't bad enough.
It's not bad. But,
No.
Yeah.
So Shandy has a horse. Her horse has like a mild hunter's bump. And and he was ridden in his former life dressage, but really fast, like that huge, big, thundering trot all the time, heavy on the forehands, in a saddle that was too tight on his withers. Hunter's bump. Once it's there, once we have deformation to the skeleton, it never goes away. We can, I'm sort of a rehab specialist working with horses who've been compromised like that. We can build muscle around it. We can reposture and repattern their bodies. You know, you learned a lot about that with Sid this morning. But we can actually change their skeleton. Once it has been deformed, it stays that way. So definitely it's nice to have young horses that you can avoid that altogether. Right? So some things to think about watching for that little peak that happens on their croup. Any weird little dips. He's got a little bit of shoulder asymmetry, which is totally normal. Who here is perfectly symmetric? Right? Not me. So I'll tell you, a little bit about, I think having a saddle fitter is an incredibly important part of your equine healthcare team, but not every saddle fitter is particularly knowledgeable. So a few things I wanted to mention today. When you're working with a saddle fitter, to be aware of whether or not they're a brand rep. That's a big one, because a lot of brand reps, some of them are wonderful, some of them have amazing training, some of them are fantastic and honest and ethical, and others are the exact opposite of that. So you do have to be careful that someone isn't just trying to sell you a saddle, and they should be able to talk you through all of this stuff. If they can't, you need to send them away. Say, no thanks, I'll work with somebody else. So it's just, just a little something to think about. Really important to have a saddle fitter, but make sure it's somebody who's interested in educating you and not just selling you something.
JJ's refusal to go forward into the trot.
Yep. So a horse who's really stuck, particularly in their front legs, they don't want to trot forward, they don't want to reach, they don't want to extend their top line. If they're bulking, that's, you know what I mean by saying bulking, yep, that can be saddle fit. A lot of the times it happens right here that I have gone to evaluate horses where, the owner brings the saddle pad out and it's like an immediate expression change. They start grinding their teeth, they tighten up, their fascia gets all tight, their ears get tight, their eyes get tight, their nostrils flare, and it's like, and then I've had some where the saddle comes out and the horse starts rearing. It's going to flip over backwards. And it's like, yeah, I'm glad you called me. Like, I think your saddle is an issue. And, they try to tell us in small ways, like what Sid was talking about. They do. They try to tell us, hey, I'm uncomfortable. Hey, this is pinching. And if we don't listen to that, we end up with some pretty severe consequences. Yeah?
Do you see behaviorally, so if a horse has had a problem with saddle fit in their past, there's associative behavior too.
Yes,
I don't
there
know what
is.
the word is, but, do you see an immediate response if you get them fitted correctly, or what are you looking for?
It really depends on the horse. I think they're just like us. There you go. That way that some of them, it's like an immediate, and even before the rider gets on, you put the saddle on and they're like, oh, it's like a shoe that fits, right? They're like, oh, thank goodness, this I can tell this isn't going to hurt me. Sometimes it can take a long time. If they've had really bad experiences or they're just that type of really sensitive horse, take a long time.
Or anytime they see a blanket or a saddle, even if it's a good one, they can still have that.
Absolutely. So it can take time. Most of them, I was hearing Sid talk about this too, they're so forgiving. They're so forgiving, and most of them are pretty quick to be like, hey, this one, yes, this feels great, thank you. Well, yeah, take this one. So really does just depend on the individual animal. Right? Oh, good, my saddles are here. So is there anybody who'd like to come up and kind of poke around at a few things? I'm going to have you come up kind of individually a little bit because I don't want to overwhelm the poor guy. Something tells me he'd be okay with it, but we want to be tactful. Good boy. All right, so this is just your standard English jump saddle. How's that fit?
A little long.
A little long? That's a lot long.
Okay.
Look at that.
A lot long.
Right? So I'm going to have you all, this actually aside from the length doesn't fit him terribly. I'll have you all kind of crowd around here a little bit just so you can see. Good boy. So obviously right away I would say, nope, I wouldn't even want to see somebody ride the horse in this saddle. I'd be like, nope, too long, he's gonna buck, take it away. But if we're looking down the gullet, when we put the saddle, the English saddle on the horse, I'm sure a lot of you have been told that you need to have 3 or 4 fingers wither clearance on top. Everybody's been told that. That's actually all the way around the withers. 3 to 4 fingers all the way around. So this one's sitting right on that wither. If you want to come in, you can kind of... Not a very good fit, huh? He says, I don't like it.
Because it's coming down so close here.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I take this off, we're going to see if I kind of shuffle it a little bit. We'll see a disturbance in the chalk drawing. Right where the shoulder, the scapula is, right? Where the lung point is, and a little bit way up here where the spinal processes are in the wither cuff. Right, my friend? So something to think about for English saddles, the tree is on the inside, and then we have this floofy padding, which is usually wool, sometimes foam, depends on the manufacturer. But this is the floofy bit, and that's why with English saddles we ride with just that thin little pad. Western saddles, and Carson, this will be good information for you. We don't want to evaluate the fit of a Western saddle truly without a pad. So I didn't bother earlier because I was like, I'm gonna have one here. Yeah, you're gonna come haul this thing up onto that horse. I'm not gonna make a fool of myself poking him with the stirrup. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the pad on because for the Western saddle, it's tree, a little bit of sheepskin to protect the tree, nothing else. So while you could ride in an English saddle without a pad, you cannot ride in a Western saddle without a pad. This is the flocking. So, I know it's not a great pad, but it's the one I had in the car.
Oh, well.
Is this the one you were riding, Camille? No, this is the one we left.
Yeah.
So I always pull the pad up into the gullet a little bit. All right, so we were talking about flare, right? Because this saddle, we can see here where the rein line is, way down here. So that's where our last rib is. This saddle too long. No. No.
Because it's not sitting.
There's no weight bearing back there. The weight bearing surface, you can feel the bars under that concho. We're good to go. So that's something, yeah,
Okay, so
thinking
the
about
skirt sits out a couple inches beyond the weight bearing.
with this saddle.
With that saddle, and you can feel that because of the bar underneath.
Yeah, and I can
Okay.
feel where the bar is.
Okay.
And I can feel where the weight's gonna end. And then this bar has a significant amount of flare. Like, Carson, could you lift it up for me? You're all nice and tall. I'm gonna pull the pad out for just a sec. We wouldn't ride like this. But there we go. You can see that coming up off his back. Yeah. So, whereas the other saddle that Carson had,
Too much drop.
it was even a little bit longer and there was no flare. So the Western saddles, that can be a little tricky. All right, I know, I'm like, who's helping me? Put the other one on.
Can I ask you a question, Chiara?
Absolutely.
So with the flare, it's still, it's not the same thing, well, it is the same thing if the rider is in the saddle. That flare, if it's up and away, the rider's weight is not going to change that.
So this, my
The bar is
husband
rigid,
Zach. Yeah, no, I won't. So my husband Zach, and this is a saddle that he made. He's a Western saddle maker. Zach started to make saddles because he rides a lot of different kinds of horses, particularly sport horses. So the warm bloody, thoroughbredy, sport horse types, rides for the public a lot. And in these cases, what he was finding, sport horses, modern sport horses are bred to be very short-backed and long-coupled for athleticism. Great, except that now we don't have saddles that frickin' fit them. Like even that English saddle, which is a very standard, well-known manufacturer, good, well-made saddle, way too long for this giant horse, right? So that's why Zach started to make Western saddles. So this saddle has even more flare than yours does. And the skirt here, see how that split? It hasn't been sewn. So this is even, I'd say even a better fit for him, but will honestly work about the same. But Zach, if you want to mention like what you do with the trees to...
Oh, I mean, I guess the only thing would be I'd order them with bars about as short as you can get, which is like 21 or 21 and a half inches. And I always order them with extra flare at the front and back to have that extra shoulder freedom at the front, and then tip them up. And then, like Chiara said, with the skirts, it's funny because like Carson saddle is by a really well-known maker, and it has a really nice traditional look. And you see how on his the skirts kind of come straight out from the cantle. It bothers me when I look at my saddles because I tip them up like this. But I ride a lot of really, really short back horses where if his hip were another couple inches this way, he would get rubbed here just from running into the skirt on some saddles, whereas this one it's tipped up out of the way. But I order them like that, like I said, as short as the bars can be, and that's why you see my concho is really, really up close to the back of the cantle, because that's where the bar on this saddle ends, is actually not even all the way to the end of that concho. And most saddles, so like I said, this is a 21.5-inch bar. Most Western saddles, the bar is 24 inches.
And to give you an idea, the average length of a saddle support area, the weight-bearing surface on the horse's back, is about 17 inches.
So that's where that flare is so important, because on a 21.5-inch bar, at the ends there's this much that's swept up out of the way, and it doesn't actually sit on the horse's back. So like Chiara was saying, that pressure profile for him ends it ends before the end of the tree, because the tree's sweeping up at the end anyway. But that was the tough part, and it all comes from the length. Those enormous bars in most Western saddles comes from some out-of-date idea about 200 square inches of saddle contact being necessary for roping, which is
Not true.
erroneous. But also then they just go, oh, well, my bar is this wide, so it needs to be this long to have 200 square inches.
See that with like T-Mobile saddles
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
4 points of contact and like
Yeah.
a million.
Huge.
And then
the
you see
skirt's
the
that long
horses
too.
with really, really swollen lumbar.
Yeah.
Really swollen lumbar and rubs on their hips
Right.
from running into the square skirting. So I'll tell you the other thing to look at here, just with this saddle, that you can see how wide this channel is. That is real wide. That's going to accommodate all the spinal processes right through there. And I'll show you with one of the English saddles where that's not necessarily the case. I think I have one anyway that's like that. So I'll say overall, I think Western saddles fit horses better than English saddles do. I probably shouldn't say that, but
Western saddle fit is more forgiving.
it is more forgiving. There we go. But the reason being, just designed to fit the horse to work all day, every day. Not to go into the arena and be a little hothouse flower and prance around for 30 minutes and then game over, right? Which is what I did, so totally fair. But if I were a working cowgirl, that's what would be on my horses all day, every day. I mean, there's a reason for it, right? Beyond aesthetics. The only real issue I run into with Western saddles is that of length. English saddles, on the other hand, yeah?
Well, I'm confused. I have a little confusion on my own saddle, on my own horse, and maybe after your presentation is a good time. But it's more about the fit at the withers, which I find on a lot of Western saddles where, you know, they're kind of wide and I like the range and the freedom there, but then they tend to go low on the withers, and I'm like, how do you get
So
the
that might
freedom
just
and the
be
lift?
the kind of profile, the size of the bars that you've got, maybe inappropriate for your horse.
Bar angle too.
Bar angle, yeah, bar width. So we were talking earlier about width
Yeah.
and angle.
Yes. Okay.
So you might just have that particular saddle.
it's
it's
too
just-
narrow here versus
It's probably too wide.
But yeah, I was going to say it
wide
is
Too
actually
angled,
probably.
too wide,
low
yeah.
on the withers.
So to help with the confusion on that, when I talk about width of the tree, so whether it's Western or English, when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about this part right here. So under the pommel. That when I talk about width, I say wide and narrow, right? And I love that about the Western saddles, that most of them are very wide. They actually accommodate the shoulders. Angle, I say steep angle or flat angle.
And the
That's
yeah.
steep, that's flat.
Yeah.
So, and when we're looking at something like this, the saddle fit term would be too narrow top, too wide bottom. So it can get a little bit confusing, the terminology, because you're like, wait, you just said it was too wide. Why are you saying it's too narrow? I'm like, well, it depends on which part of the saddle we're looking at. But my guess is that you've just got an inappropriate
When
bar
I
profile.
slide my flat hand up under there, it's tight at the, you know.
There's a pressure point.
I would say yes. you
Yeah,
know,
there
and
shouldn't
Top of the bar.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I would
too-
say
too-
angle is too
Too
wide.
Too
wide.
flat angle.
Too
Okay.
flat angle, but possibly the width is actually appropriate. It's just whether or not this
Okay.
is.
And if it were a little more narrow, it would sit out.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of Western saddles, the nice thing about Western saddle trees anyway, when you're building them, is that with English saddles, when you order narrow versus wide, this is narrow, this is wide. And of course that changes the width and the angle at the same time.
Yeah.
But when I order a Western saddle tree, I spec the gullet width and the bar angle. And actually I spec the bar angle at 3 or 4 different places down the tree, depending on the twist profile that horse needs. But something I've found, like if you've heard,
This one back on.
you know, something like semi-quarter horse bars, quarter horse bars, full quarter horse bars, that refers to bar angle. But with most saddle makers, it is completely arbitrary. One saddle maker's full quarter horse is another's regular.
I know, it's like women's jean sizing.
So I
It's
ordered
a
them
real pain.
like a proper
can't go
saddle
buy it.
maker, like this saddle that Carson got from Freckers. For sure, the tree was measured in degrees. But
It's
typically,
on a 90-degree bar.
right. So 90-degree bar
That's
is
a
usually
real
the
thing.
narrowest that anybody will build on. I order nothing wider than a 90-degree bar because Chiara was talking about with the shoulder angle. Any saddle with full quarter horse bars is probably going to be like a 93 or a 95, and it's really flat. And you're usually going to have that pressure point at the top because no horse in the world has shoulders like that. And I usually will buy mine with 85-degree bars if I'm not sure, and then I'll put leather on the bottom side of the tree that I shave into a wedge to bring it in further. So that's something that can be done on a saddle that has too wide bar angle. Is I'll take the skirts off and put saddle skirting on the bars and shape it to a different profile, or you can use a shim that's wedge shaped.
If the horse is very fine boned, this would be okay. But you can see it underneath the pommel how wide the channel is, right? And then what happens as it goes up the back of the cantle, gets narrower and narrower and narrower. A lot of the times with these English saddles, you will see it, there's barely enough room for 2 fingers here. Don't ride in those saddles, you'll give your horse kissing spines. They should have a full hand span, and this one, not quite, right? Like kind of, but not really. But for my big hands, it should be an even all the way up to the top. So this saddle, for him especially, is fired. Okay, I'm gonna have to scoot you over again, my friend. Good job. There you go. Good boy. I know. You won't hate this one. Oh, sorry, Zach.
No, whatever.
Want me to grab that, Chiara?
Yeah, maybe.
Thank you.
It's like there's so much stuff behind me. Boy. Good boy. He's like, I have had enough saddles put on me, thank you. Be gentle. Oh yeah, baby. All right, we can't see the chalk as well, but from what you can see, what do you think?
Better.
Looks
Yeah.
nice, yeah.
Actually, it fits him super nicely.
See how
So if we look for our last rib, everybody can see that? Plenty of room. Now, I often have people ask me, okay, well, a saddle can be too long, can it be too short? For me, on a small horse, yes. I am not a small person. I'm a fairly big person. On a small horse, I'm not talking one like him, I'm in the 14 hand range, or a very petite or slight horse. Because of my size and weight, I need to use every possible millimeter of the saddle support area. My horse, who I ride, a little Mustang, well, he's 15.2 on his tippy toes. But for him, I could, what's that? On his tippy toes. But for him, this is a custom saddle for him, and the panel is exactly as long as the saddle support area. I need to utilize all of that. But for you kiddos, no. You can't have a saddle that's too short, you're fine, right? Especially on a big horse like this. So its length is appropriate. And that whole wither cup, if you can kind of see where you are, the panel isn't making contact until just under the D-ring. So that whole wither cup all the way around is free. And the angle of the tree is very close to the angle of the shoulder. So if anybody wants to come and kind of see down the gullet channel there, you can see what I mean. The generation before me, like my trainer when she was growing up when I was a kid, she was taught every rider has their own saddle and the saddle must fit the rider and you just pad it up to fit whatever horse you're riding. And that was very common, right? In the 80s, kind of that, 70s, 80s, early 90s. That's kind of how it was done. And then the pendulum sort of swung the other way in the industry, and I was brought up believing the saddle fits the horse, the rider makes do. So that's what I was taught, and I was like this myself, and I hear it all the time from clients now. Well, it doesn't, I don't need it, I will make do, it doesn't matter, I'll be fine, like I just need the saddle to fit my horse. And while that's super noble, the saddle doesn't fit you, it doesn't fit your horse, even if it fits the horse. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that. Here I have my two lovely model pelvises. Aside from this one having a few vertebrae attached, do we notice any differences? I kinda, yeah, what, ooh. Oh no. Oh no! What do we see? Mm-hmm. So quite a bit going on there. This is the male pelvis, this is the female pelvis. We are built differently. So I'm gonna have to change the way that I phrase all this to be skeletally appropriate instead of gender appropriate. Because I like to be very PC in how I conduct my business. But the real truth here is that we are skeletally different. This is a male pelvis, this is a female pelvis, they are different. So biggest differences, female pelvis has the birth channel, obviously, the male pelvis does not. Male pelvis has a much longer tailbone. That's why men are more prone to breaking their tailbone than women are. Don't know if anybody's noticed that in their lives, but I know a lot of dudes with
I have broken my tailbone.
Yeah. But I don't know that many women who have. I know a few. But not that many. Also, where the hip sockets are,
Yes. The angle, they're
totally
taller, but
different.
also angled different.
So I'm going to talk about some of these differences. I'm going to use my husband to help me. No, it's okay. He does this all the time. He's used to it. So I've got a few saddles here, and I'm going to have you all sort of sit in them to get a feel for it, understanding that this is not exactly shaped like the back of a horse, but we kind of make do. So I'm going to sit us in a male seated saddle first. Everybody can see that if I sort of, it's a good angle for everybody. Excellent. So this saddle is made for a male pelvis. And I want you to see what happens when I sit in it. It's actually going to hurt me quite a bit. Okay, what do you see in my position? Hollow back. Right? I'm off my seat bones. So now if I'm in a riding lesson, my trainer is going to say to me, sit back on your seat bones. Okay, what just happened? Belly came out. So this is our anterior pelvis rotation, right? I was exaggerating it a little bit there. If I kind of, there it is. But that's still, right? Here's our posterior. Okay, I'm on my seat bones. Where do my feet go? Forward. And then the trainer says, get your leg underneath you. Okay, right? So how many of us have struggled in our lives with our equitation? I actually spent most of my life thinking that I was just not a natural rider. I was extremely competitive, upper level, English, eventing, show jumping, dressage, competition, and I spent my whole life fighting saddles and honestly thought that I was just like kind of bad at riding. Yeah, and I'm not the only woman who can say that. So when I sit in this, I feel a lot of strain in my SI. I feel a pull in my kind of hamstrings and my pelvis, like my hips feel like they're being pulled apart. I feel, even though the seat technically fits me, I feel pushed up against the front of this, which is a little bit concerning as a lady. I'm like, well, that's not very comfortable. And I'm having a really hard time kind of keeping my plumb line, right? We've all heard about that, even if we're not in the hunter ring. We've heard kind of ear, shoulder, hip, heel, right? In order for me to achieve that alignment, I think I've got it now. Right? Ish, maybe.
But it doesn't look easy.
No, this is incredibly straining. It's actually painful. So Zach, why don't you come sit in this? The balance isn't perfect, but you'll...
Yeah, you might want that towel up like you do sometimes.
I could, but it's okay. Like a frickin' glove.
That's quite comfortable. It's good thing because the saddle belongs to me.
This is Zach's dressage saddle. So how's his plumb line? Just sitting there. Pretty correct, right?
Yeah, if I had a stirrup, it would put me a little bit further back.
Yeah.
There.
Do you feel like your legs being pulled forward, backward?
No, it's quite comfortable.
Quite comfortable. Yeah. So what's sort of an interesting thing is that over 75% of equestrians in the United States of America are female, and yet saddle companies have not quite figured that out yet. Almost all saddles are manufactured
Right, and that's
for male
statistic is
anatomy.
all riders too. I bet it's more like 90% for English saddles, if not 95%.
Oh yeah, totally. So, and this is interesting because, you know, I used to do triathlon. I certainly don't anymore, but I used to. And when I needed a new bicycle seat for my bicycle, I would go into the bicycle store and I would say, "Hi, I need a bicycle seat." And they'd look at me and go, "You're a female. The female bicycle seats are over there." Okay. And I'd go and I'd buy my female bicycle seat. Now, I borrowed my dad's bike once. Whoa. Like, the chafe was real. It was terrible. So like, bicycles have this figured out. You know, jeans have this figured out. Clothing companies have this figured out. I don't know if any of you worn your husband's pants. They're not as comfortable as you think they're going to be, right? Zach, how badly do you want to put on my jeans? Like, not at all. No, they wouldn't fit you.
Yeah, motorcycle saddles are
Yeah.
anatomy specific.
So it's hopefully we're going to see a bit of a shift in the industry here. All right, you can hop down. Just do a little switcheroo with me, and then I'm going to have you lovely ladies. So this is my saddle that is designed for a lady. It's so much better. Get my feet in these little stirrups there. Okay. Right? Easy. I'm on my sit bones, my leg is underneath me. I have a flat back without a hollow or without a slump. It's like, this is it's beautiful. This nice round, like grass covered, you know, hill here instead of that sharp edge. Feels great. Zach, you come sit in this. It'll be hilarious. So I love it when he has to get on my horses now, or my students' horses. I think it's so funny. I'm like, ha ha.
See, it does the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm like, and I'm fighting it because it wants me to do this.
Right.
And then interesting too, because on the stand too, this one even has an uphill balance, and it still
They're
does
still
that.
tipping you. Yeah. Although I got in that and I was like, oh,
Yeah, so I'm very uncomfortable here.
Yeah, it's starting to hurt your back.
And the shape at the front is important too, because the men's saddles have a sharper profile at the front, so that one may play to the left or right.
We do not run into a gentleman's dilemma.
Yeah, this saddle gives me what I would call a gentleman's dilemma.
But yeah, no plumb line there, and you have to fight it to get it.
It just really does show the importance of that piece alone.
And this one's much wider, further back in the profile too, so it really feels like it's pulling my legs apart.
Which is what the other saddle feels like to me. And so same idea, I'm going to show you, we're going to do the jump saddles too. So we talk about this, and the reason being, so this is, it's actually my old jump saddle. This saddle almost crippled me. I was spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars every month. Chiro, physio, TCM, massage, unlimited supply of ibuprofen, muscle relaxants, and I was having severe SI pain that I would be down like on the floor, and Zach can attest to this, 5 to 10 days. Like it would put me, if I rode in a clinic, you know, for 2 hours, I couldn't get off the floor for a week afterwards.
Off the horse at the end of that 2-hour ride.
Yeah, he had to actually lift me off. I couldn't move. And I thought, you know, it was because I'd gotten older and had fallen off a lot and hurt myself. And no, I stopped riding in the saddle and like haven't had back pain. So interesting. So slightly different profile for the jump, but kind of same thing that you'll see here. This one wants me here, right? So if I go, okay, well, I have to have a correct position. Like even just sitting in it right now for 2 seconds, that starts to hurt my back. I can feel it right away. And you guys are gonna get to kind of play around with this too. So the difference is, when we look at the seat profile, this is an interesting one because it's trying to be kind of both. So when we're looking, and this is true for Western saddles as well, it's just easier to see with the English saddles. Here's our twist, here's our waist. So waist, twist. So we look at the pelvises for the female and the male, and this has a lot to do with the points of contact and with the location of the hip joint, hip socket, right? For the female pelvis, we need to have this big, wide, kind of rolling waist, otherwise our lady bits get crushed, similar to the gentleman's dilemma. But we need to have a very narrow twist because of the way that our femur attaches to the pelvis, and our femurs are conical, lost that one, whatever. Comes like this, and then they come in this way, whereas men's hang straight down. So the male pelvis, better to have a very narrow waist, as Zach described, but a very wide twist to fill in that space in men's legs here that we don't need filled in. All right, Zach, if you want to hop on that. I'm just kind of showing you guys the difference between the jump and the dressage.
I really like riding in this saddle.
Yeah, well, it's yours now. Yeah.
Quite comfortable. Yeah.
Interesting, right? I know. Oh, it's so frustrating.
But I do feel the wide waist is not ideal.
No. But you could manage it.
Oh yeah, I mean
Yeah.
I have.
All right. So my saddles are Schlesa. They are not the only saddle manufacturer who does female seated saddles. It's kind of their shtick. They are my favorite, but they are not the only. So I got a new jump saddle. The balance on that's going to be really wacky.
Yeah, ball your towel up there.
Yeah. And Zach, don't go too far. Ah, so right away, I don't even have to put my feet in the stirrups. You can see how well that fits, right? So it's similar to the dressage saddle. It's like, oh, well, I'm quite comfortable, Zach, if you want to hop in this
Yeah,
one.
and even with the balance not being correct, if you think about the way the horse is going to articulate underneath you when you're jumping anyway, it's going to go up and down, and you still need to stay in the middle of the saddle. Yeah, I hate this one.
I know.
This one, as soon as I sit in it, I feel my pelvis sweep. It pushes me there, and then the cantle bumps me forward if I ride in this. Yeah, yeah, I don't like it.
I know. And then I'm always like, will you get on my horse, honey? Oof. Yeah, like I feel your pain, man.
Yeah, look where the front fin starts, that's where they go. Right, so then for me to try to, I have to sit up straight, get leg underneath me, and look at my lower back. Has
So it really does the same thing that the male seated saddles do to me.
I would say, like, man in a female saddle tends to pull your legs more behind you.
And
Female.
female in a male saddle, legs get pulled forward. All right, anybody want to hop on a lady saddle? Yes, they're dressage saddles. So here we have the female saddle from the D-ring to the stirrup bar. That's a lot of space. The male saddle, D-ring to stirrup bar. So that's actually something I should have brought another pair of stirrups to put on here, but oh well. Yeah, interesting, right?
It is interesting.
And that just has to do with how the male legs hang from the pelvis versus how our legs hang from the pelvis. So again, us with our conical femurs, very wide hips. Anybody want to take a seat?